Hi everyone! Today we're gonna look at Back to the Future Part 3. It is a really great film, but once again flawed, and again both not nearly as good as the first, certainly not, and it's slightly less than the second, and it's again not one of the best film sequels ever made. As mentioned in my previous video, opinions on the Back to the Future sequels are very polarized. Some say the second film is amazing and some say it's terrible, and the least, and some say the third film is amazing and way better than the second film. Well, again, I'm in the middle. I think the second film is awesome, but flawed and not nearly as good as the first, and I think the third film is really awesome, but flawed and not nearly as good as the first. And I think it's all about on par with the second film, but I do think the second film is slightly better than the third film, but just barely. And today I will review Back to the Future Part 3, as well as Confused Matthew's mini-view of the film and the Angry Video Game Nerd's review of the film. Now, again, I'm in the middle, because I agree with Matthew that this film is great, but it isn't way better than the second. And I agree with AVGN, it's flawed, but I don't think it's a big step down of the second film either. First, let's look at how the movie was made. After Back to the Future was a giga blockbuster, the studio asked Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale to make a sequel, and if they wouldn't, someone else would. So they decided to go ahead and return and make a deal for 2 sequels to be shot back to back with the same cast and crew. Because of how busy Robert Zemeckis was on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, he only co-story wrote and directed the third film as well, as the same with the second. And Bob Gale again served as co-story writer, screenwriter and co-producer. So he again had the 2 talented people from the first film back, and again now with more, with one having more artistic control, creating more focus, making for a more focused production. And Neil Canton again returned as co-producer, and Steven Spielberg, Kevin Kennedy and Frank Marshall all again returned as co-executive producers. And Steve Starkey again returned as associate producer, so we had all the talented artists of the first film back. But once again they only returned hesitantly, and they again had the same crucial cast and crew and were able to cast all the new actors they wanted, with them getting Mary Steenburgen for the role of Clara, although she was hesitant, but since she was the only person they could see in the role, they were very happy they managed to get her. But again, they hadn't originally planned a franchise and were making 2 films at the same time and deliberately trying to make it epic. This made for slightly inspired and slightly uninspired and slightly unfocused and slightly rushed production process. However, Alan Silvestri again returned as music composer, and Industrial Light and Magic returned to create the film's special visual effects. Robert Zemeckis gave close instructions to Alan Silvestri, helping create an epic score. And they were very ambitious with stunt work, and the fact that the film was a western attracted many of the best stunt workers all across Hollywood, because westerns allowed for more complex horse riding and jumping, and western films had become rare at the time. So this was a flawed but great production. The film has really good plots. Marty goes to 8085 to get Doc back to the future because he'll be killed there by Mad Dog Tannen. The fuel tank gets ruptured, without which they can't go 88 miles per hour. And it's a really smart twist that Marty now wants to get Doc back, since he'll get killed there, since that makes sense, since it's the Wild West and people obviously get killed there. And it's also very funny to see that Marty has to convince the Doc from 1955 once again of his story by showing him the proof that he could know this through a letter from Doc. But by having a letter from Doc, he can demonstrate how he could know this and how he could be back here. And it's smart that they once again have him try to get back to the past, and now the fuel tank gets ruptured when he's attacked by Indians, which is believable since there were many wild Indians in the Wild West. Or should I say Native Americans? I'm sorry, I was wrong, Native Americans. And also, as AVGM mentions, they get really creative here, with them having to figure out a way to escape, which is really complex, sophisticated and colorful, with a lot of scientific experiments. They try horses, which is smart since horses are fast, but they aren't too fast, fast enough, so that makes perfect sense that it wouldn't work. And try liquor for fuel, which is too explosive, which again makes sense. Liquor is a very explosive substance. So that are smart twists. They eventually decide to use a train to push the DeLorean to get it to go fast enough on an unfinished train wreck that will be finished when they get to the future. So it's a 4-dimensional trick, which is very smart, taking advantage of the abilities to time travel. And so they hijack a train, and on the train it nearly explodes due to the fuel and the dangerous fuel they're using, which is believable since experimental fuel to go that fast in that time of course would be extremely difficult, and it adds a lot to the tension, and it's really exciting and colorful and complex and sophisticated. And also Ava Jens says that other than this and some other elements the film would be lacking, but they also have the conflict of Mad Dog Tannen. He wants to kill Doc for not paying for a bad product he sold without getting paid, and he has to give up his guns in the festival, but he uses a very small gun, which is clever, that he would be able to have a special gun nobody would notice, that would then kill people in a couple of days. And Marty saves Doc, throwing something at him, and he then challenges Marty. Which makes sense, that he would challenge the person who opposes him. And it was also smart that Marty happened to run across him in a bar, and that when they attack him, Doc ends up being the one to save him. That was very smart, since Doc was in the Wild West, and he would obviously try to save an innocent person being attacked. And now there's a time limit, but when Doc passes out from liquor, which he took over a broken heart, Marty and Doc don't leave in time, and they get captured. And Doc and Doc gets captured, which adds to the tension, because Marty has to try and save him, but he at the same time has to decide not to fight out in the open for his own arrogance, because that could easily kill him, since he is not good at gunfights. But he uses armor to protect himself, and when Mad Dog thinks he is dead, he kicks away his gun and beats him up, and the police arrive and discover his crimes. And since he is weak enough to arrest him, they quickly arrest him and chase after his buddies, which is believable that now that they would find out about his crimes and he was weak, they would immediately arrest him. So that's a very smart and clever twist. And we also have the subplot that he saves a woman that was supposed to have died and that he falls in love with her and considers staying behind, which would alter the timeline and endanger them, or that he has to take her with him, which would also risk alterations as well. So no, I think Ava Jens complained that there would that there would be no problem if he left her alone was dumb, since this is supposed to be a stupid dilemma. That's the issue here. He can't leave her alone because he loves her. You can't just say, no, I'm gonna leave alone my one true love, since he cares so much for her. It is an inner conflict, and she can't let him go because she loves him as well, and this adds added tension. And eventually he realizes he must let her go, and tells her why he has to leave, and she doesn't believe him and feels insulted, thinking he ridicules her. And then she decides she does love him when she hears that he was truly sad by having his heart broken by her, and she goes with him, risking alterations for the future. And she almost falls off the train, and they use the waveboard to save her, which is of course a smart twist, since being able to fly could save someone from a fall, and it's also a smart twist, and that she would arrive at the last minute, since that adds to the tension. And now Doc can't get into the DeLorean in time, and Marty gets back to the future himself, which adds a very dramatic ending, since he now has to say goodbye to Doc again. But this time Doc's life is saved, and he's in the Wild West with the one he loves. And in the future, the time machine gets destroyed, and Marty thinks he's lost Doc for good, which is even more dramatic. But then it turns out Doc has invented a time machine fueled by steam, and now comes to say hi to Marty and travel further with Clara. So he decides to risk altering the timeline and to take risks to be with his loved one, and marries her and gets kids with her. So Doc chooses to take risks for his loved one and marries and gets kids. And Marty doesn't raise the person he was gonna raise and doesn't crash, preventing the ruination of his future. So it's a really satisfying ending. And it's also really deep that Marty meets his famous great-grandfather as a baby. That's really wonderful to see him being able to use his forefather's knowledge to learn how to act in life, and that he now sees firsthand what kind people they are. However, the plots are a lot thinner than those in the first two films, and there's a lot more setup as well as exposition, for which confused Matthew criticized the second film. The opening is very long, with explaining the current situation, and it mostly it's just setting up with Marty convincing Doc he is there, why he's there, and explaining that Doc was sent back to 8085. Doc questioning how Marty could know that, and then Marty giving him the letter, which was of course clever, but that was mostly set up, as well as them finding out the flux capacitor had been repaired, and Marty trying to drive through a billboard but not crashing. And all of that was just set up, and as well as the Indians attacking him, which was of course all still very interesting and fluent stuff. And as well as the meeting with Mad Dog Tannen, that was all exposition and setup, and that was all very exciting, complex, interesting exposition and setup. But it was just that setup. It wasn't a real substantial story element yet. The opening was very long, and the story was a lot thinner. So this film isn't very tight story-wise either. And although the setup is very clever and exciting, the film is a bit more unfocused story-wise than the first two films. And it has a bit thinner plots, a lot more than the first two films, and the setup as well is even a lot longer. And even including the setup, it still is a lot shorter story than the first two films. And also Matthew comments it's an original story, but the basic conflict of having to travel back in time, having to fight a bully, were exactly the same. And he says the things that got repeated were done in a different way, in that we have the diner escape scene, but that Marty doesn't get away this time, but and that we have the issue of getting the DeLorean working, but that this time it's a question of motion as opposed to power. But yeah, part 2 also had those minor differences. They're just one minor tweak per thing, so it isn't very different. We have Doc again going crazy, meeting Marty, and Marty using his time travel knowledge to prove himself. And we have the you're my moment, and we have the manure gag, and we have Mad Dog dancing with our love interest, and we have a reference to the clock tower. We have the Marty shooting joke. So yeah, this film isn't as derivative as part 2, but it comes close, Matthew. Also, as Matthew mentions, there are some plot holes, like why doesn't Marty just tell 1955 Doc to land the DeLorean somewhere else? Again, unlike the original, this film doesn't portray time travel realistically. And also Doc is too cold to not tell Marty of his future, even when Marty wants to save him. And again, he became okay with this in the first film, and now he changes again, and he never grows to undo this change. So this is very inconsistent and hollow. Marty reacting upset when he's called a chicken is still inconsistent with the first film, as is the ruination of his future.